What's up? Welcome back. Welcome in. It's the Sooners on SI podcast, episode 243. We're coming into your ear holes here on this Thursday, August 15th. Wake up with us. For us, it's Wednesday. So if that slips, forget about it. It's cool. I'm Ryan Chapman out here in Moore. We're joined, as always, by our fearless leader, the great John Hoover, up in the 918. We got 918 Hester, 918 RSJ. 918 Hoove coming at you here on the Sooners on SI podcast.
What's up, fellas? Glad to be back.
And we'll inch a little bit closer toward Norman. We got the great Randall Sweet up in. Are you still technically in Oklahoma City? I know you've moved. I guess I haven't checked in where you've moved to, but Oklahoma City, yeah.
Yes, still technically in Oklahoma City, just a little north now.
Very good, very good. Happy Alien Romulus Week to all who celebrate. That is me, but colloquially we're known as it's week -1. Technically, week 0 is next week. Next weekend, I'll be stressing as the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets lose in, I'm sure, spectacular fashion to Florida State over in Ireland. But here on this Wednesday, as we record, it's technically the start of, or the third week, I guess, sort of fall camp in Norman as the Sooners got rolling on a Wednesday. We talked to him first on Thursday. We did get a little bit of media for you guys here over this last week. We had a little Sooners After Dark action on Saturday night. Randall and I were on hand as we talked to Kip Lewis, Fabechi Wee-Woo. We talked to the great PJ. And who else did we get? Jake Roberts. Yeah, Jake Roberts there. There you go. And then on Tuesday, we talked with Brent Venables. We talked with Robert Spears Jennings, JJ Hester, Gavin Sawchuk, and Des Malone. Guys, I guess we'll start with this, then we can work our way backwards throughout the week. It was confirmed. We discussed it on last week's show, but Brent Venables did confirm injury situation. Jaden Gibson going down, will miss time. He'll be out for essentially the year. Other than that, Hoove, Brent Venables said just bumps and bruises, nothing major other than the Gibson injury, which he confirmed.
Yeah, and we had heard some rumblings about Gentry Williams having his a recurrence of the dislocated shoulder from last year, the torn labrum that he had surgery on. He banged it up again in the scrimmage. He was out there practicing when we had open practice viewing. He looked good. You know, he said last week he's doing great. So I think that might have been a little overblown. Maybe it was a kind of a precautionary thing where he banged it or something. I mean, you got to remember it's surgically repaired, so it's probably a little sore. There's some soreness in it or some stiffness in it. But that's good news for everybody else. Really bad news for Jaden Gibson. He's one of those dudes, man. 6'5", 215, 210. Just high points to football like an NBA player when he goes up, and it's just an impressive. Every time he goes out for a pass, it seems. I mean, 26 yards, 27 yards a catch last year. 15 catches and had almost 400 yards. The dude is a big-time playmaker, and frankly, I was looking forward to seeing what he can contribute with Jackson Arnold, big-arm Jackson Arnold, throwing him the football. You know, Jackson can throw it quite a bit with more pace than Dylan Gabriel could. So I was looking forward to seeing him play and make plays and contribute and, celebrate with his teammates after that one play against TCU where he's dragging that. He goes up to catch it in traffic, stays in bounds, stays on his feet, and then drags the dude into the end zone. So plays like that, we love to cover. You love to see. If you're a fan, you love to cheer for that stuff. And his teammates had spoken openly a lot this preseason about his kind of his progression and his growth and his experience in the offense and his rapport with Jackson Arnold. All that's gone now. He's not going to get to play with these guys until next year, so that sucks.
Yeah, that's the bad. And I hesitate to say the good, but if you look around the country, unfortunately, it's this time of year that you have a bunch of these stories. It sucks, but that's part of fall camp. You don't have to go too far south to look. Texas has lost a pair of running backs. A&M lost Ruben Owens. So, Randall, I mean, knock on wood, obviously a lot of camp left to go until Oklahoma and Temple get it going. But Jaden Gibson, big loss for the wide receiver room. But other than that, it sounds like Oklahoma's been pretty fortunate on the injury front.
Sorry, I had myself muted. Like you guys mentioned, Obviously, we'd heard some maybe whispers about Gentry Williams being banged up, but we got to observe him out there on, was that Tuesday at practice, going through some of those warm-ups, going through some of those drills. So it doesn't look like if there is anything, any injuries there, is anything too serious, at least not enough to keep him sidelined for practice. So that's good news for the Oklahoma Sooners. I think that, obviously we did observe a few other injuries out there at practice, a few guys standing off to the side, not practicing, Desan McCullough, namely. But I think that, for Brent Venables to not indicate that anything else was serious, it maybe makes me think that, these are guys that are just going to miss a few weeks of camp, maybe miss, the non-conference schedule, Temple, Tulane, Houston, those games that, Brent Venables and Oklahoma aren't necessarily as worried about, but I think are maybe going to use those weeks to get guys like Desan McCullough, some of these other guys who are banged up, healthy for when Tennessee comes to town, when you've got to travel to Auburn, those big conference games that Oklahoma is really trying to prep up for and really battle that war of attrition that you hear that everyone has been warning Oklahoma about, as they enter the SEC.
Yeah, we were out there at practice for about 20 minutes, like you said, on Tuesday. We'll recap everything we saw, which truthfully, pull the curtain back. It wasn't a ton. It was a lot of stretching and it was some special teams periods. So if you want the scoop on how Oklahoma's going to cover kickoffs, stay tuned. We'll have that here for you in a second. Let's take a couple steps back in the week, though, as over the weekend, the Sooners did get out there on the practice field for a scrimmage. By this time, I'm sure if you're locked in with us here, Sooners on SI, you're probably listening to everything else all across the ecosystem. Gabe and Teddy did a great job breaking down everything Teddy saw at the scrimmage over the weekend on the Oklahoma Breakdown. They obviously do a great job there. The high notes, all that stuff. Hoove sounds like defense good. Defense wins the day. Not a lot of time for the quarterbacks. Oklahoma had a little bit of success, it sounds like, in the running game, but for the most part, it's circled all the way back around to everything you hear in a camp. Defense good day. Does that mean that's an elite unit and they're finally a Brent Venables defense? Does that mean sound the alarm on the offensive line, or somewhere in between as the Sooners work their way toward August 30th?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we have to couch every statement basically by saying we weren't at the scrimmage. No media per se was at the scrimmage. Media who used to play football for the Sooners and now have ventured into media such as podcasting or radio, those guys were allowed. So we bow down to those guys who were at the scrimmage and watched, and we'll listen to their observations. But yeah, what it sounds like is that Brent Venables was real eager to see what his defense can do, right? So he kind of unleashed them, which is among the scrimmages that I have seen and the scrimmages that I have covered is a little bit, it's not out of bounds, but it's a little bit out of the ordinary, because most times, especially when you're breaking in a new quarterback or a new offensive line, most times the defense is very vanilla. Most times the defense will not throw exotic blitzes at the young quarterback or the inexperienced offensive line. But that's what it sounds like Brent Venables was doing. And guys, is there any faster way to learn what to do, what not to do, than to see these blitzers coming at you, live bullets, live speed, all that stuff? I think that was a growing tool for Jackson and his O-line.
Yeah, you mentioned it, is there any better learning tool than to see these blitzers coming at you? That's exactly what we learned from Jackson Arnold in the bowl game against Arizona. He got that first live action of a pretty solid defense throwing whatever they could at him. And, we saw what that did. But I think that, it's safe to say there's no quarterback controversy in Norman. I think that that might be a little overblown. I don't even know really where that rumor came from. I've just seen a lot of people online talking about that. I think that Jackson Arnold is a very talented quarterback, and I think that his teammates, his coaches, all believe in him. Even if he did have a bad scrimmage, which again is just we don't know if he did or not. We haven't actually seen that. It's just we've heard that the defense looked good, and so I wouldn't fret too much about that. Like you said, Ryan, I think it's a bit of a combination of both. Jackson Arnold kind of getting used to his role as the starting quarterback, and then a really veteran defense that we've heard all offseason has made a lot of strides. We've heard that these guys are really deep, and you look at it, you've got guys like Danny Stutzman, guys like Billy Bowman. Those were Oklahoma's only two first-team All-SEC preseason guys, and they're both coming on the defensive side of the ball. So, of course, that side of the ball might have the edge in practice, especially they're a group that's played a lot more football together. So I wouldn't say that that's anything too out of the ordinary or anything that you wouldn't expect. I don't think it's anything to worry about. I just think that when it's something that the fans can't see, of course, and they haven't had football in months, it's something to overreact about.
Yeah, I mean the plight of scrimmages is when you're going against yourself, every good thing has a bad thing, right? So if Jackson Arnold is lighting the world on fire, then why is this defensive line suddenly getting no pressure? And you're back to a conversation we had last year of Oklahoma versus Max Protect. Max Protect's just going to win that battle. You flip it over and you want to see the defense take those steps forward, exactly like you're saying, Randall. This is the more experienced unit on this football team. You have a first-year starter. You've got a new patchwork offensive line that Bill Bedenbaugh will have 3 games to figure out what he feels like his best 5 is before Pierce and that Tennessee defensive line come to town, which will be a massive litmus test just immediately right as Oklahoma launches into the SEC play. It's just going to be a situation where I'm curious, does Oklahoma find a spot where once they settle on that offensive line, does it almost become like this Oklahoma offense is never going to be ball control, right? It's never going to be a Big Ten offense or anything like that. It's certainly not the Iowa experience, but do they find a bread and butter on saying it sounds like whoever has been plugged in there on the interior of the offensive line has performed really well. It feels like Oklahoma's really excited about what they've seen out of Javante Barnes early on here in fall camp. Plus you add in Gavin Sawchuk, then what does that mean with a Taylor Tatum chipping in or a Sam Franklin? What does all that look like? Does this become more of a, hey, Oklahoma is picking its spots to go yard basically with Deion Burks, Jalil Farouk, Nick Anderson, if Brennan Thompson's healthy, if a JJ Hester, who we're going to talk about, is kind of rolling through, it might not be what you expect out of the Jackson Arnold offense in the first season, but it might be the reality of the best thing for complimentary football for this team. Everybody take a drink. Complimentary football, where August 15th, basically, that's the first time. The best thing for that might be, hey, they need to run the ball a little bit and give that defense a moment to step on in and try and really turn the screw, especially if the secondary is playing as well as it sounds like they have with Billy Bowman, Robert Spears Jennings, Peyton Bowen, and then the depth it sounds like that Brent Venables is really stoked about at corner. So all of that stuff, though, Hoove, I feel like is things that we won't really be able to get a super crack at, really get nailed down until you can just start seeing it with your eyes once Temple, just not very good, or maybe a Houston with a really good head coach, Willie Fritz, though they're coming a long way from a disastrous first year through the Big 12, or Tulane, which has the foundation that Willie Fritz had, and now a new head coach stepping in.
And I think, sorry.
Go ahead, Randall.
You mentioned the running game. How do you take the pressure off a young quarterback who hasn't played a lot of football? You turn around and hand the ball off. You get the running game going, and so I think that that'll be an interesting fold into the offense. And I think, like you said, it's nice to have a veteran like Gavin Sawchuk, or even a guy like Javante Barnes, who didn't have a good year last year, but has played, plenty of snaps before in his college career. To have 2 guys like that, plus, at least a few other guys that you think you can probably sprinkle into the mix here and there. I think that that'll really help Jackson Arnold get going, especially, like you said, playing some of that complementary football.
I guess what I'm trying to read is we keep hearing that this might be, probably looks like it could be, is potentially a defensive oriented football team. It's not a surprise, of course. Brent Venables, year 3, you would expect that kind of growth and that kind of evolution for a football team under Brent Venables to start leaning toward a defensive heavy roster. And I think that's what Oklahoma is going to be. I want to see it for myself. I want to see receivers covered 40 yards down the field. I want to see somebody get, tackled in the B gap, right? Instead of making a guy miss. I want to see big hits in the secondary, which I think is not going to be a problem. But the underneath stuff that lead to missed tackles, that have led in the past to big gains or third down conversions a couple of years ago for sure, those are the things that have to be continued to be cleaned up. And we know the players. We know Downs, and we know Stutzman, and we know Bowman, and we know DJ Terry. I want to see who that next, I'm talking about next year's stars. Who are those guys? They need to start emerging now, not just during the season, not in October, November. But I need to see them start to emerge in the preseason in September and in training camp. I want to see some guys who are secondary players this year, not necessarily secondary, but secondary to those stars. I want to see them emerge this year, because next year, those guys that we talked about, Stutzman and Bowman and Downs and those guys, they're going to be gone. So you have to see that continually kind of replenish itself, I guess. And we don't know who some of those guys are. Some of them we do know, like a Kip Lewis or Peyton Bowen, people like that. But some of them, those guys that are right underneath that level, we don't know who they are yet.
Yeah, and a couple weeks out, it feels like, I mean, we broke this thing down. Just head over to the website, Oklahoma Sooners on si.com, si.com/Oklahoma, whichever one you want to go to. They both work. Bookmark it is the easiest way. All summer long, breaking it down, training camp questions, all that stuff. It kind of feels like we're about to hit that moment where just ready for things to get kicked off so we can start seeing these things with our own eyes, start to form opinions, see what happens when the live bullets are flying, all that stuff. But things we did see with our own eyes on Tuesday was a limited stint of practice. Let me just hit the injury stuff just real quick, because I think it's the biggest thing. Like Randall mentioned, we did see Deshaun McCullough off to the side working in a boot. I think the bigger thing, though, is people that were in. Gentry Williams was going through the warm-ups. We weren't there for the full practice. I don't know if he was a full participant, but he was going through the warm-ups per usual, his normal spot, front of the line, all that stuff. Did see Troy Everett bouncing around out there as well. Brent Venables had said all the way back at SEC Media Day when he talked with you, Hoover, and the other group of reporters off the off-camera stuff, not at the big podium, that Everett was ahead of schedule, so he was bouncing around back out there. But otherwise, seems pretty solid. The guys you would think of that are in the two deep, pretty much all out there and at least stretching, going through that stuff, the stuff that we saw. That made its way into some special teams work, which is where I'll toss this to you, who it was limited and it was special teams, but anything you were able to kind of glean from the little bit of practice we got to attend on Tuesday?
Yeah, I'll take the injury situation first, because I accidentally kind of trickled over and went somewhere where I wasn't supposed to, so I was closer to the injury guys. Most of the guys that were injured were walk-on freshman type players that, the teams, they're not going to get a bunch of frontline reps anyway this preseason. You're right, Troy Everett was right there. He was taking first-team reps with the O-line. What they did, just to set it up for you, they break the O-line up into tackles, guards, and centers, and he was right there with the centers, going back and forth with those guys. So then they were kind of rotating Bates and Hickman in as well, and they were just doing simple drills. Okay, they were just doing the get down in 3-point stance and hut and hit, and then catch yourself. And so it's way too early to be optimistic yet about Troy Everett's knee, but it does look like he's on his way back. He's doing some stuff, so that's good. That's got to be a good sign. Now, the special teams. Oh, and one more thing. Deshaun McCullough, he's not over there with the injured guys. Okay, just so we're clear. There's a group of injured guys that are off the field. They're doing, sit-ups and leg lifts, and they're doing what they can basically to stay fit. They're in T-shirts and shorts. Deshaun McCullough was in full uniform, maybe not uniform, but he had the shoulder pads and the helmet. And everybody, I think, was in shorts as well. He had his shorts. But he's out there scooting around. He's got his game cleats on, or maybe his practice cleats, I don't know. But he's scooting around on this scooter, left leg, left ankle, whatever it was, left foot, left toe. And he's with his teammates, and he's not like doing stuff on the side that the injured players are doing, but he's fully dressed like he's going to do something as soon as we leave. I just thought the whole optics of that thing was kind of weird. Is he working? Is he not working? Is he hurt? Is he not hurt? Anyway. If anybody has any more injury updates before I dive into special teams, please feel free.
I was going to say, I think that's all we saw from injuries. We did see Zion Kearney have to step away and get his ankle taped, but it didn't seem like that was anything too serious. Seemed like he was fine and was able to pop right back in there. I think that's all we were really able to observe from the injuries. We did see Nick Anderson going through some stretches too. So there was, I think, some reporting out there that maybe he was hurt, but from what we saw, he was at least able to go through the stretching portion of practice.
Yeah, it was pretty steady there, just a lot of stretching. And then we were into special teams. We got to see a little bit of half punt return work, not really a ton, just some guys on the special teams jugs. We got to see a couple of field goal attempts and then some half speed kickoff return stuff. Hooven, is there anything that will shape your win total in your head for Oklahoma based off the fact that Zach Schmidt is still making kicks in practice that we know he will miss in the game.
Yeah, nothing changed my opinion of Oklahoma special teams. And I was remarking to myself up here in my head during the practice viewing while I'm looking at everything through a big camera lens, right? I was remarking to myself, how is a coach really supposed to know what the hell's going on special teams? Are you any good? Because your kicker doesn't have any pressure on him, right? Your punter just kicks it as far as he can every time, no matter what. So you don't really glean anything there. Okay, hey, how about work on corner kicks? Okay, coach, I'll try to stick it in the corner. You never, because of the danger and intrigue of kickoff returns and punt returns, you never go full speed in practice, right? Full speed blocking, full speed tackling, full speed return run. That never. So how is a coach supposed to say, these are my special teams guys, this is my kick returner, this is definitely my punt returner? Because punt returner is like a punter. He's like a kicker. You can go out there and catch punts all day, and then when the lights come on and there's 85,000 people there screaming, it's a different scenario, right? There's nerves and there's, oh my God, don't fumble this. And so you just never really know until probably halfway through the season. That said, we did get to see all four kickers, not three, all four kickers make field goals. And they were rotating them through one after another. And they were changing distances and they were changing left side, right side. They called it field goal block. So when they call it up, they get on the bullhorn and they call up the teams that are good. Field goal block, line up at the 20. And so everybody runs out to the 20, right? So it feels like it wasn't really a field goal like moment. They were just kicking to give the field goal block team a look, is what it felt like. I'm probably way overanalyzing all that.
Well, who you talk about, how's a coach supposed to know? Maybe the next step in college football is just to hire psychologists, a special teams coaches. That way you can make sure throughout the offseason, throughout the preseason, that your kickers, that your returners are always confident, because that seems to be like the biggest key for these guys, right? I mean, we heard from Brent Venables all last year. Zach Schmidt, he makes his field goals in practice. That's why they're throwing him out there. Then because he said that they didn't have any other options. But Brent told us in the middle of the season last year, hey, he's making his field goals in practice. I mean, Gavin Freeman, you saw when the stakes were a lot lesser against, teams like Arkansas State in the beginning of the year, he was great in the return game. But when, there was more pressure on, he dropped the ball multiple times and he basically evaporated as a punt returner. He didn't really bring any value in that department last year. So I think that the confidence aspect is interesting. And, we really don't know if that's increased on OU special teams unit, and we won't know until, they actually get out there and are in some of those high pressure situations. But from what we were able to see, punt returners, I observed Jacob Jordan, Andrell Anthony, and Zion Raggins all going through punt return drills. So there's a chance that maybe one of them is the punt returner or is fighting for a punt return spot this year. There could be other guys in that mix. We don't know. That's just what I was able to see. And I think that all three of those options would be pretty interesting. Andrell Anthony, obviously, with his speed, but maybe you don't want to risk him there after the injury. But I think that we really, with special teams, will just have to wait and see more, because it's not something that we'll get to observe much in practice.
Yeah, and real quick, the four kickers I was talking about obviously are the four guys that were out there making field goals. I don't think we saw a missed field goal the whole time that we were at practice, which was, I counted it out, about 12 minutes. Was Liam Evans, Tyler Keltner, Josh Plastner, and of course, Zach Schmidt. So all four guys knocking it through. I guess that gives Brent Venables more options. If he feels confident about somebody kicking a 50-yarder, but Ryan, you and I talked about this yesterday as we were leaving. If you've got a new quarterback and you've got a new offensive line and you've got a pretty good defense, supposedly, you're going to have to play field position as one of your strategies. You're going to have to give up, the football to save field position. That means punting when you want to kick a field goal. That means going for it when you want to kick a field goal. Those guys have to really engender confidence in Brent Venables to let them kick a three-pointer.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think it's pretty clear at this point it's a yips conversation with Zach Schmidt, because we've heard for 3 straight camps he's nailed them in practice. We actually got to see a good bit of stuff during the spring, and Schmidt was really good during the spring. He was fired up often when he came back to the sideline, got his competitive juices flowing about being in a kicking competition. I think that that's something that we're squarely just going to have to wait and see how that pans out during the year. Who rolls out there first, if it's Keltner or Schmidt, all that stuff. We saw a year ago the initial plan A at punter Plaster, it ended up answering every single one of the punting questions the second that Elzinga got slid out there, and Elzinga's back, so it should be in good hands there. The only other thing, I don't know how much anyone really cares about this, I just find it really interesting, is the nerds that we are that go to this stuff. It was cool to kind of see the analysts in action at practice. That was a new NCAA guidance that the analysts are now no longer hamstrung by what they can actually do on the practice field, which meant during the entire little 2 or 3 minutes we were standing there during the kickoff return stuff, special teams analyst, special teams guru who was brought over from San Diego State to replace Jay Nunez, Doug Deacon, he was on the loudspeaker on the microphone, and you had Brent Venables and Miguel Chavis and Deacon all in the huddle with the kickoff return crew, and he was basically able to not just coach the ones or the first guys who were out there standing there of, I need you to shed a block like this, I need you to go in here. He's able to give out every single command over the loudspeaker for everyone on the sideline, so that when the second group that was running it came in, they immediately hopped into full speed stuff there. It was just kind of interesting. What's the end all be all? What's the effect of that? I don't know, but I've been interested to kind of talk to some of the guys, some of the players, as camp turns into the back half here and go, okay, now that you've had a chance to settle in, how much different is it to have all the analysts in your face all the time, all that stuff? But you got to see the hands-on approach there. So that was kind of interesting. Otherwise, this is as much special teams as we're probably going to talk until it costs Oklahoma a football game. So we'll close the book on that. That was the practice portion. As I mentioned, since we've last talked to you, though, we've talked to Brent Venables, 8 different players. Let's read the vibes a little bit, just like last week. Randall, let's start with you from everything this week, whether it be stuff from Brent Venables, from the players. What was kind of the most interesting thing that stood out to you from this last week of media surrounding the camp events?
Well, I think it's going to actually be something that Hoove touched on last week when we, originally talked about the Jaden Gibson report, and that's, who's going to replace him. Who I think was the first of the three of us to mention JJ Hester, up there from, as you mentioned, 918 Hoove. We heard from pretty much everyone we spoke to this week that JJ Hester's been great in camp again. And I think you mentioned, Ryan, that we've heard that in the past. Brent Venables kind of echoed those sentiments, saying that the first thing he said about JJ Hester was that the only thing that slowed him down in the past was injuries. It sounded like, from what Brent said, that he's pretty confident in JJ Hester. Obviously, he's a guy with good height, and we've heard good speed. He's been, like you and Brent both said, injured during his time at Oklahoma, so we haven't really seen him much. He had a decent, I think it was his sophomore year at Missouri, so I think there's potential there, especially now that he's a few years older. And again, you also know that you don't have to lean on him as much. Robert Spears Jennings said that he was, showing everyone why he should compete for a starting spot. Des Malone even said that he's really good. So I think, we've heard from a number of people this week that he's really kind of had another breakout performance in camp. And with the injury to Jaden Gibson, it sounds like he's going to really have an opportunity to take a few targets in the OU offense. It'll be interesting to see what his role is, when the season actually comes around. But he said that he's ready to make an impact, and it seems like, with what we were expecting from Jaden Gibson, if he does slide right into that role, he will be able to make a decent impact for the Sooners offense.
Interesting here.
Sorry, Ryan, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, with Gibson, it's a pretty unique threat, a 6'5" guy. Not that Nick Anderson's small, but it's a little bit different. Do you buy into that it needs to be 6'4" JJ Hester or 6'6" Ivan Carrion, 2 names that we've heard a couple of times that have to replace that spot? Or could Oklahoma be in a spot where, hey, if Brennan Thompson or Jaquez Petaway, your burners are your best options there, it doesn't quite matter. Get those guys out there. Let Jack Sarland air it out, just because you have a pretty big body in Nick Anderson. Plus, it sounds like actually a functional tight end room instead of just, one option, which kind of hamstrung them last year, but it was just Austin Stogner and no one else really able to chip in.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think some of that is going to depend on the matchup. Some of that's going to depend on who's defending. If you can get a 5'8" corner out there, right, on the edge, and you're in a situation where it's 3rd and 13 or something like that, you've got to maybe get a jump ball. Then maybe you go with a bigger body guy. But if you've got somebody like a 6'3" corner out there, you want to get the football in the hands of the little guy in front of him, let him try to get some space. So it depends. but I think generally speaking, you want your big guys to replace your big guys and your little guys to replace your little guys, but it doesn't have to be that way. I think that they've trained these receivers. Emmett Jones does an amazing job coaching these guys up and recruiting guys with multiple talents to be able to play multiple positions. So I think it's going to be okay. I think they're going to have enough bodies to do it. But I think when I said JJ Hester, it was hey, he's 6'4" too, and he really hasn't done anything since he's been here. We know he can play college football, but it doesn't have to be a big guy.
I agree with Hoover. I think that a lot of it's going to be really dependent on the matchup. But I do think that, if you look at Emmett Jones, the way he's recruited and the way he's, coached and game planned, even beyond his time at Oklahoma, back to Texas Tech and Kansas, he does like to have a lot of these bigger bodied receivers out there to kind of mix and match. And I think that it's kind of a common football like theme now to have the different styles in the receiver, right? You want some of your faster, quicker guys. You want some big body guys, maybe someone who's a possession receiver in the mix there. And the thing with Jaden Gibson is he's maybe not, big and sturdy like a Nick Anderson, but he can go up and pluck the ball out of the air. He makes big plays. And so I think you want to be able to replace a guy who can do that with another player who's got a similar skill set, who can go pluck the ball out of the air, kind of make Jackson Arnold right. A guy who he doesn't have to throw the ball to the exact right spot every time, that, who can go up and grab it over the defensive back, someone like that. And I mean, obviously, if Brennan Thompson, Jaquez Petaway are just flat out outplaying these guys and they're playing their way onto the field, that's a different story. But I think if all things are equal between some of those second team guys, you'd like to replace that skill set with someone of a similar skill set. And again, looking at the way Emmett Jones recruits and the way he's played his offenses in the past, that's exactly what they've done. He likes to have these big body guys. I think that you want another one of those big body options for when Nick Anderson's off the field, when you have to rotate him out. But of course, I think that we'll see plenty of Brennan Thompson this year if he stays healthy. And Jaquez Petaway, he could break into that group too. I think we talked about that last week. That wouldn't be surprising at all.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how Petaway's used. We talked about it last week that he ended up kind of getting pigeonholed as Stoops' understudy last year, and Emmett Jones did a fantastic job a year ago. That was one of the big question marks throughout camp, and then suddenly you had a transfer, a guy that we hadn't seen do it in the Oklahoma uniform, or really to that level at all in college football, and Andrel Anthony, who was the straw that stirred the drink for Oklahoma up until that injury, and then that shifted over into unreliable Drake Stoops. I do think there is one guy that is kind of being overlooked here in this wide receiver room. Jalil Farouk was really good in OU Texas. He was really good in Bedlam. Did he have a pair of, one of them a fumble, one of them technically a fumble that was turned into an interception against Arizona? Yes. Did he have the little cough up against, that was him that fumbled it on the kickoff against Tulsa, right? Farouk?
Yep.
Yeah, he had that. And was he, I blame Jeff Levy for his fumble at Kansas. Again, I don't understand why you're running Jalil Farouk between the tackles like a running back, but you still got to hold on to the football. Jalil Farouk, I don't know if he ascended to that guy who dealt with the pressure, the expectation of being your out and out wide receiver one a year ago. But if that was your second option, ask Texas how that defense felt that Jalil Farouk was the second option. Ask SMU in the fourth quarter when Jalil Farouk's making a guy miss to kind of fully extend Oklahoma. Ask Oklahoma State at times in that game if Jalil Farouk was an issue. I think he was a big-time issue. I feel like he's kind of faded to the background with Deion Burke, so I think it's going to be spectacular. Then Nick Anderson following up what was a fantastic redshirt freshman year. You want that depth, obviously, but those front three guys, I think, are enough if they stay healthy to overcome whatever you're going to miss with Jaden Gibson. Just interested to see how that plays out this year. So that's the wide receivers. Who I know that we've talked a ton about Javonte Barnes. We talked a little bit about Taylor Tatum. We did get to talk to Gavin Sawchuk, though, this week for the first time during fall camp.
We did, and wouldn't you know it, he talked a ton about Javonte Barnes. I thought that was interesting. Gavin had some cool things to say. Said he has spent, I looked it up, freshman year, 187 pounds. Last year, 195. This year, he's 200. So he has continued to put on weight, put on muscle, put on strength. And his goal this year is to not get injured in the preseason like he did last year with the hamstring. He feels like he can deliver more of a blow this year with an extra 5 pounds of muscle. Feels like he can run stronger, avoid injuries, stuff like that. But he said he's also working on, in practice, in two-a-days, in training camp. Sorry, two-a-days. Don't tell the NCAA I said that. In training camp, he said he's working on making guys miss. He's working on making that one tackler miss, and that was kind of a knock against him last year. 30-yard run should have been a 60-yard run, or a 15-yard run should have been a 40-yard run, because he just wasn't making that last guy, that last safety or linebacker or corner miss the tackle. So he's worked on that in training camp, which is the cool part is he said this is his first real training camp that he's been healthy. So that's cool. But back on Barnes, Gavin Sawchuk said Barnes is a great teammate. He said he supported everyone that comes in there, and yet he's still challenging everyone that comes in there. He's doing the same things himself. He's going out there and doing himself as well, but he's a great servant leader doing what he's doing. So I thought that was really interesting. I also asked Gavin about the 2 freshman running backs, Taylor Tatum and Xavier Robinson, and he said they've been doing great. They did a lot. They're doing a lot better than what I did my freshman year. I know that. So future looks pretty bright for those guys.
Yeah, it's interesting on Javonte Barnes. This is something that we talked with you a lot in the post games. Randall, is we all become body language experts, right? Especially in the portal era. And no matter how frustrating Javonte Barnes was with himself as far as not being 100% healthy on the field early, which led to him not being able to get on the field late, he was always that first guy, whether it was Tommy Walker, Marcus Major, Gavin Sawchuk, whoever. It almost felt like Javonte Barnes was, how quickly can I get onto the field and celebrate with these guys? Well, we know he's a great presence off the field for that running back room.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually sorting some video earlier this week of, OU Texas, and looking at one of Tommy Walker's touchdowns, he's running off the field. The first person who runs onto the field and that's greeting him is Javonte Barnes. And that's not a one-time thing. I mean, that's, like you said, whoever it was throughout the season, that's how it was. And he talked about, when we spoke with him, I think it was last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, that it was really hard for him to not be able to contribute, but he, talking to his family, talking to DeMarco Murray, he was able to kind of, remain, I don't know the right word, remain faithful in Oklahoma, know that they have a plan for him, that this is, in his mind the right, and in Oklahoma's mind the right spot for him, even though last year didn't go like as he had planned. He kind of pulled back the curtain talking about that injury, but talking about how important it was for the entire running back room to support each other. And I think, talking to Gavin Sawchuk and him talking the whole time about Javonte Barnes talking with him, he's talking about a bunch of the other running backs in the running back room. It really just shows you how close that group is. It seems like DeMarco Murray, while we know he's a really, really tough coach, it seems like he does do a good job of making sure those guys know, the guys that really are putting in the work, that are doing what he wants them to do. He makes sure that they know that he wants them to be there, that they're where they're meant to be. And I think that that's why you saw Javonte Barnes stick with Oklahoma, remain faithful, and now have this a reportedly good camp, and maybe an impactful season after not really doing anything last year.
Biggest thing, they're just gonna have to stay healthy. I know that is with everybody on the roster, Ryan, but we saw it. It took Gavin Sawchuk half the year to get online, really a little bit over that, with that hamstring derailed a whole season of Javonte Barnes. And I think the exciting thing is, first off, I have some big questions about running back, like philosophical stuff, because it's so instinctual and it feels like you got it or you don't. And it's one of those positions where, like a quarterback, they're either accurate or they're not. You can do some stuff with footwork, things like that, but there's a baseline level of accuracy. I have that same question about like vision and ball carrier vision. And we saw Eric Gray felt like take a big leap from year 1 under DeMarco Murray into year 2 under DeMarco Murray, and what he was able to do. I'm excited to see, what does Sawchuk, what does Barnes look like when the game has slowed down a half step for them, and they're hearing those that coaching point from DeMarco Murray, letting that take over, as opposed to just kind of experiencing things for the first time. I think that's a really high upside group, especially if they get to run between not just the tackles, but on the interior of that offensive line. So should be interesting to see there. You flip it over. We've been a lot of offensive heavy so far. On the other side of the ball, got to talk with Brent Venables, Robert Spears-Jennings. We're going to pair two things together here, as I thought was pretty interesting. Talk about the secondary in particular. Gentry Williams, Des Malone, Woody Washington, those are the names to a certain extent, whether they've been here for a long time or Des Malone kind of being the marquee transfer. When you talk about the cornerback room, though, Brent Venables went out of his way to pinpoint Kenai Walker as a guy that's put together maybe the most consistent 8-month run for himself. Kenai Walker, Brent Venables was speaking of. during, you talk about spring football through the summer into fall camp, a guy who rotated in there and had success kind of as a rotational guy. Then we had to take on some bigger snaps. It wasn't as good. You pair that with, we've heard great things about the safeties, whether it be Billy Bowman, Robert Spears-Jennings, or Peyton Bowen, but Spears-Jennings talked about Zach Alley, and we've heard this a couple of times from different guys. The way that Zach Alley is able to come in and categorize different buckets of plays for the defense to simplify it, something he obviously had to do as he was coaching at Jacksonville State, all that stuff. Being able to simplify that feels like it has everybody on the same page, and you pair that with a lot of these guys in year 3 of the defense, feels like this might be an opportunity to not just eliminate coverage bust, which is the end-all be-all, but really tighten in some of those issues that OU had when they were dropping back, whether it be the linebackers handing off to the secondary. Truly, when it came to some of the zone stuff, it has me really intrigued of what kind of big step forward could this secondary take, even if the pass rush, which is expected to be better, ends up being the exact same. Do you see better coverage on the back end?
I look forward to seeing what Zach Alley, the defensive coordinator, brings to the defense overall, because that quote yesterday from Robert Spears-Jennings really caught my attention. Someone asked him a simple question. Was it you, Ryan? I can't remember. Asked him a simple question about, Zach Alley and how he's helped the mental development of the players and the team. He said he's helped tremendously. He said he just shows us how he had his old guys playing. I'm not sure what that means. And he made it easier to categorize everything for us. Made it 10 times easier. That's a quote from Robert Spears-Jennings. So if something is 10 times easier, do you get the feeling that maybe Ted Roof wasn't getting through his communications all the time to the players? And one of the things that they've talked about this preseason and back in the spring was how young Zach Alley is and how he relates to the players and how they kind of tune into what he's saying. I think this is going to be a good move for Oklahoma. Just listening to these guys talk, I think it's going to be a good move.
Yeah, it feels like the way that I go about it, we're gonna mix metaphors here a little, or go on different quotes. Cale Gundy, when Jeff Levy came in, said that it was like speaking Portuguese, right? The new offensive system. That was the quote there. Okay, well, if you want to do the foreign language thing, imagine if you were year 1 into your high school Spanish class, were you better at communicating at the end of year 1? Did you have to think about it? Or were you a lot faster if you did a second year or a third year? Yep. Before arriving at Oklahoma, Ted Roof had a year with Brent Venables at Clemson learning that system. Zach Alley, GA, student assistant, all that stuff, had multiple years. Then he's taken that wealth of knowledge and had to go teach it to guys at Boise State, teach it to guys at a couple of other stops. It feels like he has become more efficient, having to start over a couple of times on how I want to get my point across, how I want to teach that. Whereas Brent Venables had a decade at Oklahoma plus, a decade at Clemson. He wasn't having to reteach that to new guys. He was having to bring new people in, but he had people who had been there for multiple years helping along. And I think that with Zach Alley, he's just been there longer. It's like would you rather have Ethan Downs going through and breaking stuff down with somebody, or Trace Ford? I'm sure that Trace Ford knows it, but Ethan Downs has an extra year built in, a couple of extra years built in. That feels like the advantage that Zach Alley had over Ted Roof, on top of being younger, maybe easy to convey, all that stuff. That just seems like what it looks like to me from the outside looking in, Randall.
Yeah, and Robert Spears-Jennings also talked about how helpful it was that, alongside Zach Alley and how easy he's made things, having some of those veteran players on the team that almost serve as coaches at this point in their career has really helped them. Obviously, for him, Billy Bowman being one specifically, a guy who's been here in Oklahoma for, 3-4 years now. And so, he talked about how, maybe if Zach Alley's focused on Peyton Bowen or a different player in the secondary, Billy Bowman's still able to watch him and coach him up and give him pointers on what he's doing. And of course, we've talked about it. Billy Bowman's, preseason first team All SEC guy. He's going to be a senior this year. So a good football player who's played a lot, someone who really can, again, pass down this wealth of knowledge. He's a guy who's been in Brent Venables' system for a few years now. So someone who can pass down the knowledge he has to these younger guys. And I think that, having Alley, and then again, these older guys in the secondary, it's Billy Bowman. On the defensive line, who mentioned, it's Ethan Downs. You've got Woody Washington as well, Danny Stutzman in the linebacker room. So you've got these veterans across the defense that can really help the coaches and help Zach Alley kind of, relay this information to some of the younger guys.
Yeah, something I was talking with RSJ about was what's it like having Brandon Hall and Billy Bowman throughout that spring portion, Coach Billy essentially, what that was like. I have to imagine that Woody's been that kind of resource who to all those corners it's been funny. Woody is a veteran, and Des Malone was talking about Woody telling stories about going up against CeeDee Lamb and how Des was like, he must have been here forever if he was going up against CeeDee Lamb. But it's also been interesting that Des Malone has also said he tries to sit right next to Gentry Williams as a guy who's on top of everything, the academic side of football, in meetings, something that Jay Valai, going back to not this year's fall camp, but a year ago this time, had said that Gentry Williams is a guy that's always, coach, I know this, I know that. It sounds like you've got a good mix of the young guys and the old guys who have in that cornerback room who know exactly what they're talking about, at least on a chalkboard.
So we haven't really mentioned a ton about Woody Washington until now. We talk about the guys coming back on defense. I mentioned DJ Terry and Stutzman and Downs. I remember Bowman. I didn't mention Woody. Woody's a fifth year, basically a starter. He started for 5 years. I think we undervalue what he brings to that cornerback position. I think we, maybe as observers of OU football, undervalue how good he is and how consistent he is. I know he had a couple of rough plays in the bowl game last year, but just how consistent in general he is. And he's your guy. He's one of your, he may not be that lockdown superstar cornerback that's going to allow 0 completions, right? But he's your guy that's coming back in this defense, knows front to back. And yet Brent Venables said twice yesterday in our interview, 20-minute interview, he said twice about Woody playing other positions and playing other spots on the field, on the defense. And finally I was like, Brent, what would necessitate moving Woody off of that field? What would make that have to happen to move him from cornerback to nickel / cheetah or one of the safety positions? And he said, nothing would have to happen. It's just that he's good enough to do it. And I read that, again, we're reading body language and trying to read between the lines. I read that as Des Malone is really good and Kenai Walker's had an unbelievable camp. And if we need to, if we can't find that third guy to come in and play that nickel position, that cheetah position, if Deshaun McCulloch's toe doesn't heal right, or if the young Kendall Dolby doesn't hold up against the run or whatever it is. He's physical already. He's a heck of a player. I love watching him hit. Hits like a rattlesnake is what Venables said. But if that happens, if they have a hole there at the cheetah or / nickel, or they need some help, somebody rotating at safety, they feel good enough about those two guys, Des Malone and Kenai Walker at corner, that they can put Woody down at a safety position. That's amazing to me that you're even considering that. But the fact of the matter is, he's good enough to do it.
Well, at the end of the day, I think everyone's very excited around Oklahoma's camp about Kendall Dolby. He can't play 100% of the snaps. That's something that Brent Venables had talked about. No one can go out there and play 100% of the snaps. That's not realistic. So then you start getting into, we know what it sounds like the options would be at cheetah if you want to go for more of a run stopper linebacker type situation, whether it be Omasigo, who was, I think that was Sammy Omasigo that was having a lot of fun behind the Des Malone scrum. You need to be sure you're headed to Oklahoma Sooners on SI.com or at Hoover's YouTube page, John Hoover Media. See if you can pop that in there. But Woody, who just blatantly at the next level, he's going to have to play either safety or a slot corner spot. I don't think he athletically has the twitch to survive where he wants to be at that corner. It's a spot where you can do a little bit of everything. You can serve what Woody needs for his next level while also giving you a very talented guy that could drop into coverage for a Kendall Dolby if he needs to come off, or slide him back around to the back end if you need to give Robert Spears Jennings, Peyton Bowen, one of those guys a blow. It'll just be really interesting to see what the whole Woody of it all is this year as a guy that can move all the way around. There's a ton of stuff that obviously we weren't able to get to when we have 8 different players plus Brent Venables here over the past week. And that's why you head to Oklahoma Sooners on SI.com, si.com/college/Oklahoma. Either one works. That's where all the videos are. As always, John Hoover Media, Hoover's YouTube page. Be sure you head over there. We put all the videos up there. If you're too lazy to do any of that stuff, I get it. Me too. At Sooners on SI on Twitter or at John E. Hoover. I'm _Ryan Chapman, Randall Sweet 5. We've also got our guy, Bryce McKinnis, at McKinnis Bryce, and Dakota at Dakota Gregory. All that stuff out there. Easy to find. Get after it. And like we said, once you get to the website, bookmark the page. Easiest way to do it. We're always there humming. We're back to full bore, 4 or 5 pieces of content minimum a day. That's how you know it's football season. Boys, let's get into some other stuff, not necessarily combing through quotes, things like that. Last week, we talked about the offensive line, one of the big questions of camp. This week, let's talk about the defensive line. It's the SEC, got to win in the trenches, all that fun stuff. Oklahoma aggressive, went out, added Dominic Williams to the interior of that defensive line. That was the big splashy post-spring portal move. By all accounts, whether it's guys we've talked to on the team, whether it's Brent Venables himself, very pleased with what Dominic Williams has come in and brought to that defensive line. So simply put, Hoove, I'll start with you. As you marry Dominic Williams to Dejon Terry, Jaden Jackson, David Stone, Grayson Halton, Devon Sears on the interior with all the options they've got, rushing the passer, setting the edge, Ethan Downs, R. Mason Thomas, PJ, Caden Woolard, Trace Ford, Okoye. I'm sure I'm missing a bunch of people as well. Is this defensive line where it needs to be heading into the year to not just be an improved group? I think we could all take a step back and say this is one of the better defensive lines Oklahoma's fielded in quite a long time. It's just, is this group going to be good enough what Oklahoma needs it to be when you pair in the schedule that the Sooners are going to face starting on August 30th?
Starting on August 30th, yes, it's going to be good enough. Starting on September 21st, it's a different story. Maybe, probably. I think they're going to be better, especially if we're just talking interior tackles where Dominic Williams plays. I think they're going to be better at that position. I'll go through some names real quick with you. I've got it up here on the screen, and there's a bunch. There is a bunch of them, and I can interject a little bit of what I saw from practice, where DJ Terry is getting every first rep. He's the first guy up in every drill that we saw. And what's interesting is that he gets down in the 3-point stance and he hits the pad and he goes through the drill and he tackles the dummy, and then he goes to the back of the line. And then Todd Bates spends the next 2 or 3 minutes going over every move with the next guy and the next guy. And it was just interesting that he was spending extra time, which is what a coach does, spending extra time and extra reps. Get back in line, do it again. He made David Stone go like 4 times and guess what? On the 4th one, he absolutely annihilated it. So you love to see that. By the way, David Stone was the 3rd guy in the rotation that I was watching, interior defensive tackles going at it. So you love to see that out of those guys, especially the young ones.
I think that, for me, with seeing if this defensive line will be good enough, especially on the interior, it's really a wait and see. I think that the top of the line guys, I think that they've proven that they will be good enough. I think that Dominic Williams, I think that Dejon Terry, and I think that even really Grayson Halton even have shown that they can play college football at a high level. They are good football players. I think that, do you have the depth to rotate those guys in and out without them getting tired? And when they are off the field, are you still putting quality players on the field in place of them? I think that's where it's really going to be a wait and see process. Of course, Jaden Jackson, he was one of my favorite players in OU's 2024 recruiting class, a guy that I really tabbed as one of the most underrated guys in that class. So I'm a big fan of his game, and we've heard that he's looked great, but we haven't seen it on the field yet. David Stone, a guy that physically looks great. We've heard maybe needs a little more time before he's ready to be a regular, consistent player for OU's defense. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. These guys are true freshmen about to go play in the SEC. So, are those guys going to step up? Is it someone like Champ Sanders, someone like Marcus Strong? Brent Venables said on Tuesday that Devon Sears has had a great camp. So, are these guys that we don't know as much about, are they going to step up? And if they step up, then I think that you feel really, really good about where that interior defensive line group is. Because I think, like I said, I think that Dejon Terry, I think that Dominic Williams, I think that Grayson Halton, I think those 3 will be good enough to field a pretty good top 3. After that, what does that interior rotation look like? Can they still perform? That's where I'm really waiting to see. And if those guys do perform, then I think that Oklahoma is going to have one of the deepest defensive lines that they've had in a while. I mean, regardless, they're going to have one of the deepest defensive lines they've had in a while. But I think that's what it'll take for them to really stand out nationally.
Yeah, my 2 worries. One is maybe more slanted to earlier in the year. I think this will sort itself out as Jaden Jackson, David Stone get to have a lot more college football, the baptism by fire, as Halton gets a bigger role. As he had couple of pretty nice games. I think the second half against West Virginia last year, he was just absolutely getting after it. So as those guys kind of really see what it means to do it for 4 quarters in the SEC, I do have a bit of a depth worry. If somebody goes down early in the season, there's a reason that Oklahoma's trying to get Jermaine Lele and Dominic Williams before Lele flipped to Texas and moved along there. I think that that's something, though, that will work itself out as the year goes on, as long as they can stay healthy on the front end, if that makes sense. But this is my big question mark for the group, to go from the hall of really, really good to an elite defense. We've seen flashes, right? Ethan Downs, out-of-body experience against Texas, absolute menace. 2 of his 4.5 sacks came in that game. 2 of his should-have-been 2 taunting penalties also came in that game. I don't think anyone's complaining. It just shows that Ethan Downs, a guy that is usually not he's mild-mannered on the field, but it doesn't kind of spill over after the whistle, was just an absolute animal. But R. Mason Thomas, excuse me. We're going to RMT, not RSJ. R. Mason Thomas kind of had the year robbed by a high ankle sprain in camp. He was going to win a starting job. If this is going to be a team that needs to be led by the defense, and I think it will be, and I think it's going to be a really good defense, for me to feel really good about the ceiling of what this entire season could be, I just don't know if right now Oklahoma has a dude that we look at and go, on every 3rd and 7, this dude's a threat to decapitate an opposing quarterback. They've got to make Nico at Tennessee feel uncomfortable. Quinn Ewers, you saw they made Quinn Ewers feel uncomfortable at times a year ago. You add in Jackson Dart, Cook at Missouri, Milroe certainly, Nussmeier, if he's as good as LSU thinks he's going to be. I think PJ has the traits to be that guy. I think Okoye in a couple of years has the traits to be that kind of guy. I'm interested to see what R. Mason Thomas can be, because he certainly looked a menace against Arizona, but we just didn't get to see it for a whole year. If Oklahoma doesn't have that, I think they can be really, really good. But when you factor in some of the offensive line questions, the inevitability of Jackson's going to make mistakes as a first-year quarterback, starting quarterback, that's just going to happen. I just wonder if Oklahoma maybe lacks that piece that could hold them back from being a defense that takes another big step forward in pass defense that's pretty good, 20-20 like they were a year ago. That's my one big question mark. Can someone show they've taken that step forward to be that guy? If so, I think the defense could be really special, which could allow the team to be really special. But everything is kind of through the scope of this schedule that they're going to have to play here, starting on September 21st when Tennessee comes down, like you said, Who.
Yeah, Ryan, for me, the name you kept mentioning there is the guy. He needs to have a breakout season. It's PJ Adebawore. And I say that because Ethan Downs, we've seen what he can do, right? We've seen how consistent he is. He's not, he's not going to keep people awake at night. He's not going to make, NFL GMs go, I want that guy in the first round of the draft, right? He's a good player. He's a good college player, and he can play out of his mind like he did against Texas last year. If he could do that every week, he'd be an All-American. If he could flip that switch every week, he'd be an All-American. Don't know if that's possible. The other one, R. Mason Thomas, you mentioned him on the other side, other projected starting defensive end. He's had a couple of good seasons for a young guy that hasn't had very many snaps, but he's, again, projected to be the starter this year if he stays healthy. I think PJ Adebore's got way more talent, way more skills, way more tools to operate with than either one of those two guys. Does he pick up the defense? Does he pick up the responsibility? Does he pick up his teammates? Does he gain their trust? Is he someone who does his assignment before he pins his ears back and goes and gets the quarterback? He's got to mature into a defensive player that Brent Venables can count on. I think let me double check my math here before I say this. I think I just looked it up. 184 snaps last year, according to Pro Football Focus. That includes 11 in the first game, 11 in the second game, 14 in one game, 7 against UCF, 6 against Kansas, 3 against BYU, and 7 against Arizona. What? No, those snaps need to at least double, if not triple, this year for him to be the player that everybody thinks he is. Johnny 5-star, go get the quarterback, become a first-round draft pick. That's the guy they need to flip the switch.
You're totally right. I mean, that's a top 10 recruit in the country. That guy has to pan out.
Yep.
I mean, especially with the physical traits that he has. Again, it's only year two for him at Oklahoma, so the fact that he wasn't racking up double-digit sacks last year isn't the most concerning. But you're right, this year is when you need to start to see more of those flashes. What I wanted to add was, we're talking about the edgy guys. We haven't even mentioned Caden Woolard. Is that a guy who could come in and make a difference off the edge for Oklahoma? I mean,
Yeah.
by all reports, he's had a good camp too. The guy who's had production at a much, I don't want to say much lower, but at a lower level of college football in the MAC than he will be facing this year in the SEC. So is that a guy who can come in and kind of pick up that transition seamlessly and be an impact player off the edge for Oklahoma? To your point, Ryan, I don't think that he has the potential to be, like what a PJ Adebawore could be, just a game wrecker who every 3rd and 7 is a threat to wreck someone's game plan. But I do think that he could be at least an impact player who can rack up a few sacks and pressure the quarterback for Oklahoma, which is something that they need, especially in a rotation where you don't have a lot of guys who have proven themselves yet.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really good unit this year. I really do. Across the board, they've got a lot of depth. Trace Ford, a name that we haven't talked about as well, who is healthy. And in his second year in Brent Venables defense, that's usually a combination for a little bit more production. What does that look like, though, when you're kind of at the end of your college career? It just is a big question for me about I'm not worried about the defensive ends being a pretty good unit. I'm just looking for a guy that by the end of the year, we're going to say he's a superstar. Billy Bowman is going to be a superstar. Danny Stutzman's going to be a superstar. I feel confident. And if Gentry Williams is healthy, I think those guys all have superstar, not just potential, but I think we've seen them play at that level at different points last year, whether it be really those first 6-7 games for Stutzman. Billy Bowman turned it on and flipped that switch as conference play got going. Gentry was just a matter of being healthy. They need that guy at defensive end too, I think, to really have the season that Oklahoma wants to have. And a lot of that is to do with what they have on the schedule. We have the Associated Press. The AP poll is out. It's here. And it looks for Oklahoma a lot like the coaches poll. Oklahoma, number 16. That is good enough for, yep, you guessed it, 8th in the SEC. The great Mike Houck, Oklahoma communications guru, popped this out there. Number of AP top 15 opponents on each SEC team's schedule. Oklahoma has 6 top 15 opponents. They are all going to be conference games. Florida also has 6, 5 of those versus the SEC, one of them against Florida State. Arkansas, Georgia, Mississippi State, South Carolina, Vandy, they all have 5 of those teams. Georgia, one of those non-conference. South Carolina, one of those non-conference. Alabama, Kentucky A&M all have 4 of those. Auburn has 3. LSU, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Texas, they all have 2 AP top 15. And then Mizzou gets off easy with just the 1. Hoove, it all shapes up for Oklahoma to statistically, whether you want to just do the AP poll, the coaches poll, the SP plus, all the models have Oklahoma simultaneously in the top 15, top 16 in the country, and sitting at a projection of somewhere between 7.5 and 8.5 wins. It's going to be kind of the damned if you do, damned if you don't portion of this season. Where do you see this thing go? What needs to go right for Oklahoma to have the year? What does success look like, and where are potentially the pitfalls? And are you leaning one way or the other?
That's a hard read, man. I think 9-3 makes a lot of people happy in the SEC against this schedule. 8-4 is probably more realistic, but I'm sorry, 7-5 is not off the table. 6-6 is not off the table. When you look at this schedule, I'm currently in the middle of a series. I just finished chapter 2, so check it out. Oklahoma Sooners on SI.com. Yesterday blew up was the 3 most winnable games on the SEC schedule. Today is the 3 most losable games, and then tomorrow we'll dive into the ones that are either or coin tosses. And it's tough coming up with it. It's not easy to look at this schedule and say these are the 3 most winnable games. Same with the ones where it's like you get to pick 3 the most losable games. Well, there's actually a lot more than 3 that they could lose. And we're operating under the presumption here that everybody stays healthy, all things on the board, all things being equal, right? So if there's an injury at one position or another, no more Jaden Gibson's kind of thing, I think they can withstand that, and I think they can have a successful season. I don't know what that looks like. Top 10, top 15, make the playoff at 9-3. a lot of talk about that. I will say this. Here's where I wanted to go with my AP top 25 analysis, and that is half the people who read our stuff say, AP top 25 preseason polls don't matter. True. And then there's some people who say, oh my God, we're ranked 16. No, that's terrible. Oh God, we're going to have a miserable season. Also true. So which is it? Or do they matter or do they not matter? Let's go through a couple of numbers real quick. The preseason number one in the college football playoff era has finished in the top 5 every season. So your preseason number one team has been so good and so obvious that they finish top 5 no matter how bad their season is. The 10 years of the college football playoff from 2014 to 23, the number one team in the AP preseason poll made the playoffs 7 times, 7 out of 10. It's pretty good, right? So I guess you got to give that up to them. Every national champ in the playoff era has started at least in the top 6. So to say it doesn't matter would be inaccurate then, all right? I'm sorry, to say it doesn't matter, would be inaccurate, because you're going to have a good season if you're in the top. And if you're in the top, you've got a better shot at winning the national title. Simple as that. There's a lot of things, though, that come into this. For those teams that are not highly ranked in the preseason poll, each of the last 3 seasons of the 14 format, right? We're in 12 now, so it's a different deal. But of the 14 format, there was a team that started the season unranked or outside the top 10 that made the playoff. Each of the last 3 seasons of the 14 format, there was a team that came from nowhere and made the playoff field. So it matters. It doesn't matter. Just Oklahoma Sooners on SI.com, and that's all you need right there. Whether it matters or doesn't matter, we're going to be providing you with all the information.
Yeah, Randall, it's been pretty interesting because this week was, I think, the first time we got official underdog questions throughout some media stuff. It's been talked about, the SEC, all that stuff, but it's the first time I think players asked about being the underdog. I think that's kind of the weirdness for Oklahoma this go around is I don't really think there's a lot of belief they're going to be awful, things like that. I think that the apprehension of looking up and saying 7-5, 6-6 could very well happen is just because there might be 6 just flat out better teams on Oklahoma's schedule. And the last time that happened was the 90s. And it was happening in the 90s because they were bad. This Oklahoma team could be good. They're just in a league that is stock full of talent. If you just look at what last year's final top 12 looked like, yeah, a lot of those teams you just copy and paste. And that's basically how the SEC picked Oklahoma's schedule.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point's been hammered home, but if this Oklahoma team that we're watching in fall camp now was playing last year's Big 12 schedule, I think that Oklahoma's not underdogs in many games, if any. I think that the perception completely changes, like you said, because of that schedule. And I think that the ranking factor, where Oklahoma is ranked, schedule factors into that too. If Oklahoma had Missouri's schedule or Texas' schedule, would they maybe be ranked higher than 16? When they're not playing Alabama and Texas and Missouri and Ole Miss, and like you said, just a gauntlet of teams. It feels like once you get into SEC play, it feels like every other week Oklahoma's got one of those top 15 teams. So, again, if that wasn't the schedule, would people look at Oklahoma differently? I think that there is some validity to that, but again, as the saying goes, you can only play who's on your schedule. And I think that, to really achieve your goals in the SEC, you're going to have to go through a lot of these top teams in the country anyway, right? And so, playing them on the way there, I think is all just part of the life of, the SEC now. Florida's got a pretty difficult schedule too. So Oklahoma, we know next year their schedule's not going to get any easier, right? It's the same teams just flip. So they'll have to go on the road to an Alabama or, some of these other places. I think that it'll be interesting to see throughout the next few years how Oklahoma responds to not being continuously, picked as that top team in the conference like they were in the Big 12. This isn't right now. It's kind of a new feeling, but over the next few years, when they probably will again be picked behind Georgia and Alabama next year, maybe even Texas again, just based on how the programs are trending right now.
With Michigan coming to town next year instead of
That's
Houston.
right.
So Real quick, Ryan, let me finish that thought with this. Over the first 10 years of the 4-team playoff, again, all this is out the window because we now have 12-team playoffs, but the first 10 years of the 4-team playoff, Texas, Washington, Notre Dame, Clemson, Washington, Georgia, and the Oklahoma Sooners came from outside the top 10 to make the playoff. Everybody remembers 2015 when they played Clemson in the playoff and it didn't turn out too well.
Well, Clemson was sign stealing anyway. That's what we've learned, right? From all this, that everyone was sign stealing. The Michigan note was exactly where I was going to. Is it's like this year Oklahoma has this kind of SEC schedule, and then they've got an FCS team in Maine, a team dressing up as an FCS team in Temple, and then Houston and Tulane that are kind of in flux. Next year they'll have a Michigan team coming to town that will, you would imagine, they might lose some legit production along the line of scrimmage with the draft, but another year on into Sharon Moore, they're having to replace a ton of production this year. Should be interesting all told. Hey, both of you guys should be happy with this. I'm letting you off the hook here. This is not the moment for us to give our schedule predictions, all that stuff, the official record like I put in the rundown. I just put that to scare you because our infamous preseason prediction show comes up next